Let's start with Greyhound, which is an interesting film for a couple of reasons. Firstly, it's the first major film to be released on the new Apple TV Plus streaming platform. It was originally meant for cinemas, Sony had made it, and then they sold it to Apple TV when the lockdown began. It was going to be released in June, I think, in cinemas, but instead it's going straight to streaming right now. The other reason it's particularly interesting is because it stars and was written by longtime friend of the show, Tom Hanks. Now, who has been something of a guiding beacon through the last few months of turmoil for many of us. So now here he is with a new film, I think his first since A Beautiful Day in the Neighbourhood, to hopefully save the day again. Now, there's been a long-running meme on this show about Tom Hanks and his precarious relationship with water over the course of his career. He's falling into water, he's jumping into water, he's being hit by water, generally having quite an antagonistic relationship with water over the course of the last few decades. Greyhound is kind of the logical conclusion of this trend. It's an adaptation of a novel by C.S. Forrester called The Good Shepherd, about a US Navy commander whose name is Ernest Krauss. And he is charged in 1942, just as America was entering the Second World War, with escorting an Allied supply convoy across the Atlantic at a time when an enormous part of the middle of the ocean, called the Mid-Atlantic Gap, was not covered by anti-submarine air defence. So you basically had to get from the US to the west coast of the UK or back again by defending yourself on the surface of the water. So Hanks is on this destroyer, and he is going to be responsible, him and his crew are going to be responsible for the safety of this entire convoy. Basically, with the exception of a very brief prologue featuring Elizabeth Shue as Ernie's sweetheart, the entire film takes place over the course of this convoy, which I don't think it's giving away too much to say is not a smooth crossing. They do encounter Nazi U-boats at some points along the way, and the journey gets incredibly dicey. Now, it sounds, when you describe the premise, like a completely classic Tom Hanks role, because you have this guy who has to be stoical, he has to be resourceful, he has to get through this incredibly high-pressure situation with humility and grace, and he's in charge of all these younger soldiers who are slightly amped up and, ready to fight, but don't necessarily have the weight of experience that he has. There's one of a very few nice character grace notes here, where one of them starts raving about having wiped out 50 Krauts when they managed to sink a U-boat towards the start of the film. Hanks has to remind him, of course, that these are 50 human beings, 50 officers as well. And, you kind of think of this and you think, okay, so we've seen Captain Phillips, we've seen Sully, we've seen Apollo 13, we've seen Castaway. We kind of have a general sense of how this is going to pan out. And indeed, when we first meet Ernie Krauss, he's in his quarters praying, and there's a Bible verse from Hebrews jammed into the frame of his mirror, which says, Jesus Christ, the same yesterday, today, and forever. So the idea is that this one kind of solid thing that he can hold on to during this time of extreme turmoil is going to be his faith, and it's going to be this one thing that's going to get him through. So you're kind of primed for this classic Hanksian character study. That's not at all what the film is. There are these little grace notes occasionally, like that moment with the younger officer throughout, where we get a little bit more of a sense of who Ernie is. But really what it is this kind of 91-minute... it's a very short film. It's basically edited down to the bone. 91-minute action procedural about what it is like to cross the Atlantic while the Mid-Atlantic Gap was still open, while there are Nazi U-boats patrolling the area in 1942. It's a really bizarre film with zero subtext whatsoever. Castaway, one of the all-time great Hanks performances. It's about a guy going to a desert island, but it's also about persisting through the absolute lowest ebbs of your life, and about kind of finding what the absolute core of your humanity is when all hell breaks loose, and hanging on to that and, being able to get through. Captain Phillips is about a hijacking, but it's also a film that's about the strange consequences of globalization and the weird balance of power between two men. You can have one from a developed nation, one from a third world nation. You can put them together in this situation and the balance of power changes completely. It's about, there being grey areas between obvious good and evil and conflicts. This is a film about submarines shooting at some boats, which is just about submarines shooting at some boats. And so I kind of watched it, waiting for the gravitas, the Hanksian gravitas to kick in. And it just never arrived. Now, the procedural details in Greyhound, they are nicely observed. Clearly this is a film that's been written with, an eye on the history books and for the verisimilitude that is going to count in films like this. There's a lot of great stuff, these kind of tactile details where you have guys checking the radar and noting the position of enemy vessels with wax pencils on glass, constantly sketching, re-updating the map for where things are. There's also this kind of running joke, I suppose, with Rob Morgan, who plays the ship's cook, who keeps bringing Krause his snacks, food, sandwiches, meals, and he never ever gets a chance to eat them because something always comes up that he's got to then run off and attend to. But the film powers through these moments just to constantly get to the next point of conflict, the next point of spectacle. And there's one of the things that I would have really expected a film like Greyhound to seize upon is Thomas Kretschmann plays one of the U-boat commanders, and his voice occasionally comes across on the radio. And any other big Tom Hanks star vehicle movie would stop at that point, and it would use this kind of baleful grumble from the depths to really set your nerves on edge, to remind you of what the stakes are here. They play mind games with this great, which is beautifully delivered dialogue by Kretschmann. But this film, in Greyhound, it just feels like, oh well, it's just another thing to get to before the next torpedo gets shot. And I think the brevity of it, the fact that it does only last 90 minutes, and the fact that it is so confined to this one area, makes me wonder if the original vision for this film was more expansive, and there were more of these character moments that are really lacking. The idea that you can just make the entire film effectively on board this one destroyer, it's a nice idea, but then I think in practice here the director's Aaron Schneider, who's I think quite young. He's only made one film previous to this, Get Low, which was a long time ago. It was about 9 years ago, and he's not like a director like Robert Zemeckis, who can embrace that idea that we're working on a very small set with all of this CG green screen backdrop dropped in, and we're going to really mine this for visual excitement. We're going to think of clever and exciting ways to keep this visually interesting throughout the entire journey. This is pretty much a film of pewter and navy, and it's just grey, grey, grey all the way through. I think there's one tilt up to the Northern Lights at one point for kind of poignancy, which does work. But you think, a more experienced director, particularly someone like Zemeckis, who is so great at integrating CG with the real world into this strange synthesized mixture, would have really found visual opportunities in this that are not discovered. So I felt like it was, I'd only sort of consumed the very, very top level of the film, and there was all this other stuff that was missing, that wasn't there. And I wonder, was it originally there? Has it been stripped out? Or was just, Tom Hanks fancied making this kind of very procedural style action thriller? But it left me feeling even hungrier than poor old Ernie is when he never gets a chance to eat his corned beef sandwich. It's not a full meal.